Hey, how's it going, guys? This is your boy Haze, and today we're going to be discussing the new patch notes coming out on the 13th for both Frost DKs and Unholy DKs in the near future. Now, I wanted to get on the PTR and test these out, but things have not been updated on the PTR, and the PTR is not currently up. So what we're going to go ahead and do is break down what exactly is going on with these notes, let you know where they're going to be at and how they're going to be playing. So, let's jump into this.
It's who we are, it's what we do, we've come so far. And now we pay the price, so don't even cry. The world is breaking down, and I cannot leave the ground.
So starting off, we're going to talk about Frost DK's buff. Yes, Frost buff. Frost buff. We need more Frost buff. We need a lot more Frost buff. Buff can just buff away. So anyways, Frost DK damage is being increased by 5%. And being that the majority of Frost DK's damage is kind of like minute, small things that you put together to increase damage, it is going to affect us a lot more than it would affect a lot of other classes in comparison to increasing our burst pressure, which is really good for us as Frost DKs, since the majority of the time our damage comes from overall DPS or cleave DPS, which cleave DPS is going to actually increase quite a bit more for Frost DKs based on how things work in comparison to, let's say, other classes would. So I'm really excited to see how that's going to change our PvP scenarios, and of course with our healing increase and that extra 15% Frost Strike increase, I believe it was a week or two ago, one of the two. Anyways, so we increased our Frost Strike damage by 15%. With this extra 5%, we're looking at a 20% increase on Frost Strike damage, which absolutely blows my mind. It would take that 90k Frost Strike crit you seen on a PTR video a while back and would turn it into more like 118k Frost Strike crit, which is just absolutely insane to see that change coming in on Frost DK so fast. I mean, it really makes a statement for how bad of a position we were in previously on a Frost DK compared to where we are now. We've seen, what, 3 or 4 buffs in comparison to the video I made a while back where I was just really mad about how Frost DKs were, compared to where we are now is day and night. So let's go ahead and talk about why I'm a little bit more excited for this buff than the average Frost DK would be. And that's simply because I like to run the Frost Indignation build for Mythic Plus scenarios, the Frost Scythe Frost Indignation build. And why is this going to affect this build greatly in comparison to, let's say, the majority of Breath build? Now, the majority of Breath builds, you're going to see Gathering Storms, Breath of Cindricos, Runic Atomb build. Some of them are using Frost Scythe to cleave the extra frost damage and AoE the adds, but the majority you're going to be seeing is running Frozen Pulse to make up for the kind of lack of downtime that Breath has outside of major cooldowns. But with this spec, the reason why it's amping me up, the reason why I'm so excited for it in comparison to, let's say, other classes would be, is for the simple reason that Frost DKs running the Ice Cap Frost Indignation spec are dealing 100k plus burst damage on a target by simply popping Pillar of Frost. Now, a 5% damage increase on something that hits for, 10,000 damage is only going to be like 500 damage. But if something's hitting for 100,000 damage, that means there's going to be an extra 5,000 damage on that. You modify a crit to that, we're not affecting the large 100k in the beginning, but just the modification of the extra damage is going to be around 9,000 damage if it crits. Now, this is a heavy crit spec, so you're almost guaranteed crits every time. So essentially, how many targets you are hitting is going to increase your damage based on 9,000 per target hit in comparison to what it was before. So like this Frostwhelp Indignation popping off, let's say there's 10 adds. That's going to be 90,000 extra damage on that AoE scenario. So if you're doing like Waycrest Manor or Freehold, where you're doing massive pulls generally the majority of the time, it's going to be an insane amount of DPS gain when it comes to those bursty scenarios in comparison to what we previously were, which is really exciting to me, which a lot of people don't even understand the complete strength of this spec based on how that bursty and the cooldown reduction works. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to show you guys exactly what I'm talking about. So with this spec, it's completely like upfront burst is insane. With this spec, your highest damage is going to be your little dragons coming off your pillar, and of course your Frost Scythe, and then you'll throw in your big dragon Frostworm's Fury whenever it comes off cooldown for some massive AoE damage. But let's go ahead, I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. So the increase on that 5% is going to be massive for this spec, especially because it's based on crit and blood of the enemy. So we'll throw up Remorseless Winter so it records the damage correctly. We're going to throw up Blood of the Enemy up. We're going to throw up our Pillar of Frost. We can cleave 2 to 3 Frost Scythes to increase the overall damage of the next Frostworm's Fury, but you want to throw up that Frostworm's Fury before Blood of the Enemy falls off, otherwise it's going to be a loss. But I'm going to go ahead and cheese it this time and just do some stupid damage with it, because I want to know what the difference in comparison is, so I want to have some kind of thing to show exactly what the damage was like before and then after. I'll probably do some kind of video like that, but we'll have to see. But we'll go ahead and throw up our Remorseless Winter, hit Blood of the Enemy, throw off that big burst, throw off our little dragons, and throw off our big dragon. That's a 500k burst already. You modify that by 5%. But you guys see where I'm going with this. That was a 500k burst. Just sit back in your seat. It was 200k before that. I mean, whoo, I'm actually pretty excited for that 5% increase. Is gonna be good. Alright, so let's go ahead and start talking about Unholy DK. Unholy DK sadly do not get as good of news as Frosty Ks are getting currently, so let's kind of dive into that a little bit deeper. So we're going to start off with the elephant in the room, and that comes down to the Unholy DK Necrotic Strike nerf. Now, Necrotic Strike is being nerfed from 7% down to 5%, which realistically doesn't sound like much, but it's probably going to affect it much more than you previously thought, unless you've ran the numbers, and then you probably do understand what's going on with this. Now, what's going on is my Frosty K has 322k health currently in his gear when I'm PvPing. Now, if we were to take 7% of that, it would add up to 22,500 health, rounded, obviously. Now, if we were to stack that Necrotic Strike 10 times, that would be 225k Necrotic Stack Healing Absorption on my DK. Now, if we actually take that and we do the same formula at 5%, one Necrotic Strike is going to deal 16,000 damage, 16,000 healing absorption, which results in a loss of 6,440 healing absorption nerf in comparison to where it previously was. Now, realistically, that is actually quite a bit of healing absorption just off a single necrotic of being nerfed. Based on your target's health pool, it's going to be like a 28 to like 35% necro nerf on how much healing absorption your necrotic strikes are going to be dealing, which is actually quite massive. And when you look at it in a smaller scale, it's not necessarily as effective, but if you look at it in a larger scale comparison to what it was at 7%, 10 stacks of necrotic strike was 225k healing absorption, while at 5% it's 161k healing absorption, which is a total healing absorption loss of 64,000. Very massive amount of healing loss when it comes to necrotic striking and your burst capabilities. To add a kind of a cherry on top of that nerf, they decided to whack you with an abomination nerf to your abomination's attack speed, in which, you know, your abomination's auto attacks actually has a chance to give you a bursting wound on the target, with a fairly good chance on the majority of its attacks if it actually gets to the target. Applies bursting wounds to the target, which would allow you to apply again more necrotic strikes over time. So instead of getting, let's say, 15 necrotic strikes out in 20 seconds, you're only able to apply, let's say, 12 necrotic strikes, and then you add in the actual necrotic strike reduction on each of those necrotic strikes. You could be looking at almost like a 40% necrotic strike nerf, maybe even more when you accumulate all those things together. Now, luckily, there is a little bit of saving grace when it comes to Unholy DKs in the next little hotfix patch coming out, and that's their damages. You know, same as Frosty K for some odd reason, their damage is being increased by 5%. Now, where is this good? When it comes to Mythic Plus scenarios or raid scenarios, obviously this is an absolute buff. But when it comes to the PvP side of Unholy DKs, is this damage increase gonna be enough to keep Unholy DKs where they're at? Or will they fall a little bit in, let's say, the tier list of DPS when it comes to Arena? But overall, I believe they're going to be looking at like a, I don't know, around a 13, 14, 15% overall nerf. This is definitely a nerf to the Unholy DK class because, again, we know mechanically Necrotic Strike and mechanics are the bread and butter of Unholy DKs. Now, there may be a few changes coming up based on like when you're going to use your Scourge Strike, because Scourge Strike was buffed up previously. It's going to get obviously buffed up by another 5%, and because of the healing mechanic reduction, Scourge Strike may actually become a normal part of the Unholy Death Knight rotation, and of course if you're trying to deal massive AoE damage, it's definitely most likely going to become mainline, considering how much Necrotic Strike is being nerfed. It's not saying you're not going to use Necrotic Strike or spamming Necrotic Strike won't work, but if you're mindlessly spamming Necrotic Strike, you are definitely going to feel this nerf a lot more than you would if you, let's say, weren't spamming Necrotic Strike. So at the end of the day, where is this going to leave us with the two specs? When it comes to Frosty K's, obviously this is just an overall increase. We're better than we were the day before. We can't complain. It didn't nerf us any. They didn't nerf our healing. They didn't nerf our survivability. They didn't nerf us at all. We are just looking at a straight across buff. Now as for Unholy, it's going to be a little bit harder to target. But in comparison to Frost versus Unholy, because I know a lot of people are wondering, do I reroll to Frost? Do I keep playing Unholy? What am I supposed to do? Unholy most likely is still going to be very viable because of that damage increase. If they didn't add that in, it would probably hurt Unholy a lot more than they're currently receiving. Now, the way Unholy DKs are right now, they're kind of just mindlessly smashing on Necrotic Strike, which realistically doesn't make the spec very fun in terms of playstyle or being creative with how you're going to go ahead and land a kill on a target, which is something we found very odd when we did the Scourge Strike versus Necrotic Strike video in the past, that we just found out that just spamming Necrotic Strike mindlessly was way better than using Scourge Strike at almost any point unless you're executing a target inside of Arena. Now I believe there's going to be places that you can sub that in to actually deal extra pressure instead of just, you know, spamming the living crap out of your healing absorption ability. Now, in terms of that 5% overall damage, I believe it's going to make Unholy DK stronger when it comes to AoE situations than they previously were, let's say rated BG or just random BG scenarios. And of course, in Mythic Plus scenarios, it's going to make Unholy DKs quite a bit stronger than they were before. And in terms of single target DPS, because we can see that these 5% damage increases weren't necessarily pointed towards PvP for either classes. I mean, I could see it being a random benefit, but I believe these 5% damage increases were definitely more focused around balancing out the two classes when it comes to raid DPS in comparison to these classes, these balances being based around PvP. Besides Unholy, that actually got specific PvP nerfs. So we will have to see what's going on with that. In terms of what's going to be stronger, Frost or Unholy in Arena, I could still see it being Unholy just based on the mechanics and the way that Unholy can burst on a target in comparison to Frost DKs, which really just like Frost DKs are just not that great when it comes to just 1 or 2 targets, maybe 3 targets. Frost DKs become great when there's 5 to 10 targets. That's where Frost DK's bread and butter is. That's where they're going to be good at based on how they're balanced at the moment. And the only way I could see them really increasing in Arena capabilities is they're going to need quite a bit more Frost Strike damage overall to compete with a lot of these other bursty classes. But again, we'll have to see what's going on in the future. But I hope you guys again enjoyed this video. I wish I could test it out a little bit better and figure some stuff out, but we gotta wait until those patch notes come out either on the PTR or they just come out live, but we're gonna have to see what they do. So if you have any questions or comments, let me know down in the comments on this video. If you liked it, leave a like. I know a couple of you have been asking me to make this update both on Discord messages and in game. There's people tracking me down in game being like, you better do an update video. Okay, I will, guys, I will. So again, leave a like if you enjoyed. Until next time, this was your boy Hazzed.